And we are back, everyone. Hello, I am Reed Galen, your host for today. It is the Friday, December 3rd version of Lunch with Lincoln. Joining me today is Jeff Timmer, Senior Advisor to the Lincoln Project and proud Michigan native. It is 9:59 here in the Mountain Time Zone, 11:59 in the East. Jeff, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Reed. I look forward to the discussion.
So, a couple things I want to discuss with you today. Obviously, it's been a busy week politically. It's been a tragic week. We're going on 2 years with the coronavirus, and then in your home state of Michigan, we saw, another terribly tragic, school shooting, 4 kids dead. Kid's dad bought him a gun, and he went to school. And so there, you and I have been in were in the Republican Party long enough to remember that, for a long time, Republicans used the concept of life, specifically when it came to abortion, to call themselves the party of life, right to life, all of these things. Obviously, this week, the Supreme Court heard, probably the most dire and direct challenge to Roe v. Wade, the 50-year-old ruling that legalized abortion nationally out of the state of Mississippi. Based court watchers and everybody on Twitter, which means everybody's got a bullhorn. Seem to be concerned that a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court will overturn Roe v. Wade, send all these things back to the states, which would be a massive cultural rift in the country, but also create systematic healthcare issues for women in particular. But I think that it's time to take the moniker of the party of life away from Republicans. I think they don't deserve it, first. And second, people have said this before, is that they believe in life right up until the moment that you actually appear in the world. And then at that point, you're sort of on your own. Again, we go back to, the gun culture and the mass shootings we see. And we also see this, this idea of, being just anti-vaccination, anti-masks, everything that says, they don't care about Americans generally. And they certainly don't even appear to care about their supporters. In fact, they seem to care less about their supporters because they're telling them, it's okay to, carry a gun around on your hip without a permit. And then, don't get vaccinated. And if you die, don't worry, you'll be okay in the afterlife.
I think you summed it up very well. I saw a tweet from the RNC last night from Ronna McDaniel that says the Republican Party will always be the party of life. And it got me to thinking that unless, it involves schools and guns, unless it involves COVID mitigation, unless it involves Black and brown lives, other than that, really sanctity. It really is nothing more than a talking point. It really is astounding, how people who I was in the trenches with, I'm sure people that you were in the trenches with, who demonstrated a commitment to the pro-life movement. Whether or not you agree with them or not isn't the issue. They saw themselves that way. They don't recognize the hypocrisy, or if they do, they just don't care. And I'm sure there's a mix of both kinds of people still left in the party.
So, Jeff, I had a woman named Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who's an expert in authoritarianism, wrote a book called Strongmen that sort of relates the history of the sort of Trump-esque kind of person, whether or not it was Pinochet in Chile or Mussolini. And I asked her this question, and I asked her to her as an academic, but I'm going to ask it to you as a former practicing Republican, which is, when I was coming up, the quote unquote conservative movement, whether or not it was on judges, abortion, guns, all the things that we're seeing now, redistricting, ALEC, all of those things at the state level, I was either ignorant to them or, willfully ignorant to this. But it seems to be a thing that has gone on relentlessly year in, year out, decade in, decade out, with or without the Republican Party itself. from my perspective, or even Republican candidates who sort of paid lip service to it because they needed to hold a certain constituency of supporters. But now we're coming to this sort of end state of it where, it's now morphing. All of these efforts are now going to meet with a Donald Trump or a Trump-like person or a DeSantis or an Abbott, where the, authoritarianism is now the order of the day. Do you think that was always the plan, or do you think they were pushing for these things because they believed in them, from a policy perspective, and the monster got out of the cage?
I definitely think that. I mean, having worked with these people for years, I don't think there was some grand master plan that we weren't privy to. Right. I think that it's been this kind of convergence of circumstances that have kind of led us to this this kind of. It's the greatest of irony when you have Republicans and conservatives running around the country for the last year saying "my body, my choice" when it comes to the vaccine. And not being able to draw the distinction between the absurdity of saying that in the face of years and decades of the debate regarding abortion and pro-life, pro-choice. I look at the episode that became, or I guess the circumstance last fall about this time or before the election that came up in the Mark Meadows book that was leaked this week. That Trump tested positive before the Amy Coney Barrett ceremony at the White House, before the debate. You've got the Republicans, the leading Republican, the president, running around like he's Typhoid Mary, right, knowingly potentially affecting everybody in close to him, and everybody who was at a high level in the party. And that to me kind of demonstrates the not just the callousness of Trump, but those all around him who knew this was going on. From I don't know that Mitch McConnell knew that Trump had tested positive. I doubt that. But all the people who were there at the White House, the Chris Christie's, they didn't care. They just don't care about the. Life is nothing more than a talking point for them. And the title of Stuart Stevens' book, it was all a lie. I think that the past year, or now going on 2 years, has underscored that. That even abortion, I believe, is nothing more than a talking point for most Republicans. If Roe is actually overturned or significantly eroded by the Supreme Court, it's going to be the ultimate dog catching the car moment for Republicans in campaigns. It's like, okay, now what? For years, it has been a motivating tool to energize the evangelical sect of the party that arose, that kind of became an overt part of the party after the Pat Robertson presidential run in 1988. Before then, the Republican Party was largely a secular organization that fought on fiscal issues and national security issues. After the late 80s, it became decidedly theological. And there's a lot of people that firmly believe what they say, what they hear when it comes to that issue. But from an electoral campaign motivational standpoint, having Roe in place is much more practical for Republican campaign practitioners than if it goes away.
Right. Well, it's interesting you say that about Robertson in '88, because then you had Pat Buchanan in '92, who sort of carried that culture cross. In '96, I don't remember who it was against Dole, but I'm sure somebody was there. Then you had like a Gary Bauer in 2000, and then in 2008 you had Mike Huckabee, right? Was sort of the standard bearer, and then I think it was or Santorum, one way or the other. The point was is that we always saw them as like they were the outlier, right? Like, well, those people had to go somewhere, so that's where they went. And what we didn't realize is that they were the canary in the coal mine, which was they kept putting up their person. None of them knew that they would get it in Trump, right? But even somebody said this earlier today, I think on Twitter, that if Trump were reelected, he could go back on 99% of what he said about pro-life statements, and the evangelical movement would stay with him, right?
Like, oh, sure, they've proven that.
But I don't know if you ever saw that movie. It was called "Thank You for Smoking," and it was a book as well, but it was a send-up of a guy who's a tobacco lobbyist, and his two best friends in Washington are the lobbyists for booze and guns. And they call themselves the Merchants of Death, right, as a joke. And his son asked him at one point in the movie, "Dad, what does it take to be a lobbyist?" And he says, "Well, son, it takes a certain moral flexibility." And now, like, you don't even, to be a Republican, you don't even need to be morally flexible. You just need to be amoral, probably, and indifferent to the lives of those around you. And in fact, not only indifferent, but scornful of those who would believe that trying to, let's say, keep school kids safe in a place like a high school in Michigan where you live, or keep the elderly or kids or those with comorbidities safe, from a novel coronavirus, is somehow the height of weakness, as opposed to seeing, like, as we've said on this program and others before, that like the first job of government is to keep its citizens safe and to do the things it can save. Now, safety has a broad definition. You can take it too far, obviously, but it also seems that, if Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, and Steve Bannon had to stack the bodies of their supporters up like cordwood to win elections or be successful, they would.
I think the school shooting kind of underscores the fleeting devotion that we, not just as people on the center right or former Republicans, or have toward life, but just that we as the collective culture in America. When something like this happens, going back to Columbine, which I guess was one of the first mass school shootings, and we've had over 20 years now of copycats. And every time it happens, we, rightfully are horrified for, when it happens and in the aftermath, and as the funerals are going on and as people are still in the hospital. But then we tolerate it. Distance gets us away, and we don't do anything about it. We accept it. And I think we have to kind of confront our indifference to the fact that it's going to happen again. We have two choices before us. We act or we don't act. And every time the collective political will dissipates to do something about this. This time it's not even getting started. The leader of the Michigan Senate, immediately in the aftermath of the news coming out in Oxford and Oakland County about the deaths and the shooting, says, because he was asked, is this going to be an opportunity to take up gun control or to address this issue? Mm-hmm. Because there's many things that could be done short of banning guns or taking your guns away. To have a reasonable debate on ways to mitigate access to guns with kids, right. He immediately dismissed even the notion, well, that will lead us down a slippery slope that'll turn the country into something, we won't like and we won't recognize. If the country as it is, the status quo is, kids are mowed down by their classmates every couple of months, I'm willing to take the chance. And I think most polls show that most Americans are willing to take the chance of changing the country from right. the status quo and take the risk that it's something we won't recognize, because what it is, well, let's recognize what it is. It's a culture that accepts that the children will be slaughtered regularly. That's the reality of the situation. And we have kind of become numb to it. Oh, it's awful. But there's not something we can really do about it because of the Second Amendment. Move on, and it'll happen again in 3 months and 6 months and 9 months or a year.
Right, but it's, a couple of things. One is the Second Amendment is sacrosanct, right? The First Amendment for Republicans, anyway, is only sacrosanct when you agree with what they say, right? And then it's, even we saw with Marco Rubio a couple of months ago, saying an op-ed about corporate America, if we have to legislate what it means, what you do and how you say and what you say to ensure that you're a patriotic company, that's what we'll do, right? So, I mean, I think it's the same thing like when you see, Jeff, on social media, like, can you believe Fox News just said this when they push something that's patently untrue? Like, I don't understand why people are surprised anymore. Like you'd be like, this is what they do. Like they lie. There is no, the truth is immaterial because they're going to say whatever they believe is their message of the day or the message of the week, to push a particular agenda. The truth is out the window. So like, stop. Like if you see them lying, like that shouldn't shock you. It shouldn't surprise you. They'd be like, yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah, and it seems like we're so caught up in the kind of the outrage. It's, can you believe this? That we kind of quickly lose sight of doing something pragmatic, something different than we've been doing for the last 20 years when it comes to school shootings. Let's stay on that. Whatever we've been doing clearly isn't working. So, what is it we can try different? I don't pretend to be the expert who knows the solution to this. I don't think any of us do. And I'm not naive enough to think we can make danger and risk go away. But there are certainly things that we can do to mitigate that risk. Yet we have one of the two major political parties who have drawn a red line in the sand that you shall not even dip your toe across that line to talk about this. We won't do anything to mitigate this. We won't do anything to change this. And no matter the resolve of, if there was unanimous consent between all the Democrats in Washington right now, you'd have Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema unwilling to break the filibuster to do anything regarding an assault weapons ban like we had for more than a decade, from the 90s into the Bush presidency. It was allowed to expire. Gun crimes using semi-automatic weapons diminished. Surprise. There are reasonable things that would draw support from wide swath of voters, 70, 75% or more of voters that don't infringe on the fundamental words of the Constitution, the right to own and bear arms, but some practical limitations on the accessibility of those, it only makes sense. I saw the Michigan Attorney General yesterday, who I know has been a guest on the Lincoln Project podcast. She said, we're looking at a situation. She tied these two issues of abortion and guns together. She said, we're looking at a situation where it's very likely that within the next several months, it will be easier for teenage boys to buy guns than for adult women to get an abortion. And that's very true.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. One is a couple of weeks ago at my daughter's school, someone like in the IT department hit the wrong button, and the alarm for active shooter lockdown was announced over the PA system. And what was most disheartening and upsetting, Jeff, was that they weren't even surprised by it. Like this was they're like, yeah, we had to lock in our rooms, and the teacher's like, behind your desks and all this other. But like they're 9 and 11. Like they weren't surprised
small
by
children,
it.
Right. Yeah, and the video that was widely shown in the aftermath of the shooting in Oxford, where that showed the students in the classroom, you hear somebody outside the door saying, let me in, and they're like, no, we're not going to do that because
it's interesting. This is how on the ball they were. He's like, sheriff's department, and they're like, how do we know you're this? We're just going to keep it locked for now. And he's like, no, come on, bro. And they're like, no, sheriff says bro. And they got the hell out of the room.
Now the sheriff's department said it actually was one of ours. So it turned out it wasn't the shooter.
Oh, really?
But the fact that those kids were kind of, they were just kind of like, they knew what to do. The fact that these children, they're 14, 15, 16 years old, and they acted like, okay, this was kind of a routine thing that they had planned on encountering sometime in their life. Think about where we are as a culture, as a society, that's how our children react to something like that, rather than, oh my God, that they maintain calm under pressure because they've had to go through the training, because we allow these things to happen. That when they happen, we don't have the will to resolve to lessen the probability that they'd happen again. Right. And so we have millions of children across the country who see this on the news this week, and they don't think it's a rare thing. They don't think it's something that can't happen to them. They start planning in their minds for how they'll react when it does. And we fundamentally failed them in light of that.
No, I think you're right. And I think, I think about the United States as a country and as a culture. And the way that you're talking is clearly it's fraying, and it's maybe it's already frayed completely, but I always thought that, in the United States, we hoped that every individual life had significant value, right? It was the reason why, you try and get a police officer to show up in 30 seconds, or the fire department to show up in 30 seconds, right? When you call 911, or, if there's a boat that has gone missing off the coast of the Atlantic or the Pacific, and the Coast Guard spends a week, with boats and helicopters and planes and everything else looking for these people, right? For singular individuals, singular human beings. But now it's like, well, 4 more kids died. That sucks. By the way, in Texas, we're going to get rid of all permitting for guns. We're going to ban abortion, and we're going to encourage vigilantism. I mean, like, Jeff, what could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. It barely rated on the news yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. But outside of the UN headquarters in New York, there was a guy walking around with a shotgun. And New York police converged on him because no one carries guns openly in New York. And my reaction was, that could just be, Wednesday at the Michigan Capitol, where until last year, you could walk in carrying a rifle or a shotgun and not be stopped. And it wasn't until the lockdown started at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic in April of 2020. There's a very famous images of hundreds of these Duck Dynasty looking people showing up at the Michigan Capitol, standing in the gallery, looming over the House and Senate as they're in session, with long guns kind of hanging over the railings, pointed down in the direction of the legislators. And that was something that took nearly a year of debate as to whether or not they would ban guns in the Capitol building. Well, and so the fact that we have a culture that's apparently unlike any in the world when it comes to how we react to the presence of firearms. And surprise, there's a correlation that we also happen to be the only nation on earth where these things happen at a frequency and a exponentially higher rate per capita than anywhere else in the country. Right. I'm not saying that these kinds of things haven't happened anywhere else, couldn't happen somewhere else, but they happen at a far less greater frequency, and they are a rarity. They're the rarity they used to be here. We've had guns in our country forever. People did walk around. There were homes, homes all over the country for years had firearms. Kids didn't take them to school and use them to shoot up their classmates. People didn't take them to work and use them to mow down their coworkers. And we seem unwilling to look at the underlying factors as to why it's happening more frequently, why it's happening here. It's not just with kids. I mean, we're more alarmed, I think, with kids than when somebody walks into the post office and blows away their supervisor. But it's no different. It's just a matter of you have adults doing it versus children. What is it about our culture, the American psyche, that allows this to happen, and then allows us to be kind of desensitized and numb to it, and unwilling to say no more?
Right.
I don't have the answer. I'm just but it is something that we seem unwilling or afraid to confront.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, that's the thing is, some people say you got to put new laws on the books. Will it do any good if the old laws aren't being enforced? Like, I'm all for, like, when it comes to this kind of stuff, let's give it a shot. Right. I mean, there's a lot of people who say, you come for my gun and I'm going to defend myself. And you see these people with, 90 rifles and thousands. I mean, first of all, even Rambo can only shoot 2 guns at a time. Right. So, like, it's fascinating. And then, there's just that, to your point about the people in Michigan, not only the goons who, walked up to Governor Whitmer's door, but the anarchist militia weirdos that also attempted to, kidnap and kill her, or they were at least plotting to do so. That's one of the things that one of my podcast guests said this week, is that what the sort of Trumpist movement has done has given all these otherwise strange, sort of fringy people an umbrella to live underneath that allows them to be part of sort of the national conversation, and some sort of legitimacy, and all of it's based in threat and fear, right? When you see these guys like the what are the guys, the dudes who call themselves the Proud Boys, who wear the skirts, they show up to school board meetings, but they cover their faces, not because they're afraid of COVID, but clearly because they're afraid of someone figuring out who they are. That seems ironic to me. But I think that, to your point, and this is one thing that we've been talking about this week, and we'll talk more about, is that we talk a lot about Republicans and the Republican Party, not because, look, the Republican Party for a long time, but, certainly since Trump was president, has done plenty, and his acolytes have done plenty that are worth disdain and defeat. But the truth is that the only path back to salvaging some sort of democracy in this country is to defeat the Republican Party from top to bottom electorally as often as we can and as quickly as we can, because they are, as you pointed out, an anti-democratic force. They are not small d Democrats. They're not small L liberals. They don't believe in this stuff anymore. I mean, we just saw there was an announcement, it was either last night or today, that Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is basically creating his own. He's gonna ask the Florida legislature for $3.5 million to basically fund his own brown shirt movement. I mean, this is
what can go wrong, right? and we watch this, and we see it happening, and we think, okay, DeSantis doing this, whatever, Abbott putting out bounties on abortion, or women in Texas, and we think, okay, that's happening there. What could go wrong? I'm sure that the folks, I'm not making light of the Nazi comparison, but watching the indifference, that's happening. It's kind of being presented as both sidesism. This general kind of indifference or malaise or maybe it's weariness. Maybe there's what the hell can we do about it? Kind of defeatism that it seems so anti-American in its nature, that will allow a small group of committed, devoted, fervent zealots intent on doing whatever it is they want to act. And once they have that power, it's too late. That's why I know that we continue, you start to feel like Chicken Little, but we talked about how 2022 and 2024 could be the most important watershed elections in American history. If it's not just the presidential election in 2024, the outcome of 2022 could make whatever that the culmination of 2024 a foregone conclusion. If the folks that are anti-democratic, that are focused on seizing power through illiberal means, if they're willing to do that and they gain control in 2022, all bets are off in 2024. in this callousness toward others, this callousness toward life, this sickness that has manifested, not just our politics, but our culture, will do nothing but grow, and it really is scary.
Well, and I'll say this as we start to wrap up here is that everyone, I mean, and to take make your Chicken Little and make it a whole barnyard full of chickens is if this stuff goes down, like there's no guarantee that like the opposition's just going to be like, oh, I'm fine with this, like just yes, please oppress me, throw me in jail. Right? Like we start to go down a very dark path faster and faster and faster, where you think the governor of California, whoever it is going to be like, oh, okay, I'm good with that, or the governor of New York is like, oh no, I'm good with that. Like that's just not how it's going to work, because their citizens will start to say, I'm a Californian, right? In California we do this, and then you have this even more atomization of not only the American people but also the country itself. But the good news is, Jeff, we have someone who is decent and capable and competent in the White House. Guys, we dropped a new spot this morning called Work. B, why don't we go ahead and roll that, and then we'll let everybody get on to their weekend.
It's the end of a hard year for America. People are tired, worn down, worried. That's the truth. The damage Trump did to our economy, to our families, and our place in the world can't be undone overnight. It takes time. It takes leadership. It takes work. President Joe Biden is doing the work. He's not promising TV miracles. He's delivering results. COVID vaccinations, saving lives, an economy getting back into gear. Facing the tough problems, not with drama, but with competence, decency, hope. It doesn't mean we don't have hard work ahead, but Americans aren't scared of hard work. And neither is Joe Biden.
All right, so guys, just remember that as dark and gloomy as Jeff and I can be sometimes, that there are green shoots. The economy is growing. And think about this, guys. When people talk about the vaccine, yes, it is a public health thing, but it is a public health thing that has dramatic and profound economic impact. The more people that get vaccinated, the more businesses that ask or require their employees to get vaccinated means those businesses will stay open, especially, Jeff, as you know, the small businesses that, still make up the backbone of a lot of, cities, towns, counties in this country. They've had their Lazarus moment once or twice already. They probably don't get a third shot at it if this thing really breaks out in a way that nobody hopes for, but, no one can predict at this point. And so, I think that, what we'd like to tell, sometimes we like to tell our Democratic friends is like, yes, there's the human piece of this, there's the life piece of this, but you want to talk to folks in the middle, say, guys, this is as much an economic argument as anything else. The more people who stay healthy, the more people who don't go to a hospital, the more people who don't overrun ERs, the more people who don't have to cancel their kids going to school, who, don't walk into a coffee shop and get 9 people sick and the place has to shut down. Like, that starts to lift the boats and we can start to see the end of this. But if it's going to be half the country, Jeff, is dedicated to not being on board, then we'll go from Omicron to Omega, right? And then they'll have to come up with, then we'll start naming this goddamn thing like hurricanes. And so, like, I think, Biden's doing, look, presidents are they're crisis managers, Jeff. That's what they are, right? Mm-hmm. Like, being president of the United States means you're a crisis manager. And Biden, much like Obama, right, came into office with like 19 of them. And so I think that as you see that, vax rates are creeping up, the economy is moving, gas prices are coming down, that there are good things happening. And then, we sometimes get sidetracked, or you pointed, we get down in the mouth about the tragedies we see in places like Michigan. We have to take that on board and say, why do we do this every day, guys? So that this stuff doesn't keep happening. Because if we do nothing, it'll get worse. It won't get better.
there are more of us than there are of them, and we have to keep that in mind.
Amen. Well, listen, Jeff, I want to thank you for joining me. Everybody, thanks for giving us a few extra minutes today. I hope everybody has a healthy, safe, and happy weekend. Jeff and I will be on the road next week, so look forward to some fun from that. But I believe that Ryan Wiggins and Marco Valera will be your hosts on Monday, so treat them gently. Until then, Jeff, thanks again, and everyone, we'll see you next time.